Welcome to Troy and Abed in the morning. This is the God Theory podcast. This week, first of all, disclaimer, it's been a couple weeks since we've been on here. 2 weeks ago, this is entirely my fault, by the way. 2 weeks ago, I was sick. I had some sort of stomach bug, and I felt like an asshole. You know, it's bad when I'm not even I won't even watch Netflix. I was like, I don't feel good. I just rolled over.
I can't Netflix today.
Netflix is too much.
I can't Netflix and chill.
Because I've got the Netflix chills. Because I had some kind of flu thing. Well, and then the next week I was gone to a little bit of a family reunion. It was a 4-day event, super fun, had a great time. Went to my cousin's house in Houston, and my sister's family met us there as well. Had a great time. But we drove back, and we got here like crazy early in the morning the next day. It was pretty bad. So, yeah, here we are now, though. Enough of that talk. It's nonsense.
Yes.
How are you doing, Dave?
I'm well. Doing pretty well. We are coming up to I'm a Colorado citizen now, officially. You know, you're supposed to change your driver's license and your license plate when you move to a new state.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it never really occurred to me that I needed to do that because I'm not used to living in a place that long. So I finally, 2.5 years later, changed my Arkansas driver's license to a Colorado one this week.
Nice. Okay.
And I was able to register to vote at the same time. So 2 birds with 1 stone.
Oh, so you're going to be voting in the primary?
No, turns out the primary is a very archaic system that it's a closed caucus and you have to register by January 4th to vote 4 months later. So
that happened to me down here. Okay, so that's not the case in all states.
Yeah, no, Nevada, you could vote right up to the day of the caucus. So it just depends on the state.
Yeah, same thing with Iowa. You sign up at the caucus. That's kind of common sense, really. Well, I mean, maybe you have to check to see if they're a citizen, but
I always wonder, whenever you make an election less accessible to people, you got to wonder about the motivations there.
Yeah, I think there was a law called Jim Crow law at some point that had that same sort of reasoning.
Yeah, it seems like the Republican playbook is make it as hard as possible to vote so that just the people you want voting are voting. It seems like the Democrats are doing that too, because I was going to vote for Bernie Sanders, like many people my age who were not invested in the, were pretty apathetic to the political system up until now.
Yeah.
But I was so apathetic that I was not registered as a Democrat until a couple weeks ago.
I mean, I could give a fuck less. I mean, when has people ever done what they promised they were going to do on the campaign trail? They don't. Right. Do they even try it? No. They just go silent. So I've been very disillusioned with the political system. I have been on record as telling people not to vote because I went the other way around. I looked at the system objectively. Think about if you could pretend you're an alien, okay? Mm-hmm. And you come in and you see this, or somebody's hired you to look at their government system in Bangladesh or something, right? And they're like, help us solve this problem. We've got a voter turnout of around anywhere between 15 to 20% nationwide, right?
Yes.
So not a lot of people turning up. The people who do turn up, there's about a 50-50 split. And it depends on the election between these two parties. And then you're like, what are the two parties? And they're like, well, it's these two random parties that they're quite different on some subjects, pretty similar on others. And you're like, where are the rest of the parties? And like, they've pretty much worked themselves to be the only ones. What would you do with this system? And yeah, my answer was you need some kind of revolution. You need to make a point one way or the other. Either everyone turns up or no one turns up, right? We need to take the power back. Because then they're like, if they also said, well, it's not the people making the decisions, it's these lobbyists, they're paying for whoever does the most money is a pretty good predictor of who might win. And there's a lot more factors in that obviously going in, like momentum and who gets to, who drops out from the caucuses and primaries and whatnot. But the whole point is money is a big predictive factor. So what would you do? And for me, my answer was, well, zeros, the number 0 is a lot closer than 100. And considering we're not going to get everyone out there, many people just aren't going to vote even if you beg them. What if we just all stopped voting? Wouldn't that make a point to people? Or if it dropped down to even 5%, people would take notice at that point. Mm-hmm. That was my theory, is that no one should vote. Same idea is that we need to change government, different modality. But then I just totally changed my mind. Finally, you get this guy coming through who's like, hey, this sucks. Let's change this. And I'm like, yeah, yes. And also, hey, those other countries? Which other ones? All the other successful ones? Do you mean literally all the other successful ones? Literally all the other successful ones? All right, let's get more like that. Then you get even other liberals, other people that think like us going, that wouldn't work for us. You have no empirical reason to think it won't work for us. And any example that you have is easily answered by literally Googling what do other countries do about this. Now, we have a different system, sure, but Is it unattainable? That's a
Yeah.
matter of
And maybe more importantly, is our current system working? I feel like we've tried this one for a while. It doesn't seem to be working that well.
or at all. And
Yeah.
universal healthcare, how can we possibly disagree over these things? It's ridiculous.
Well, and people always point to Canada, which has long wait times. Like, well, look what happened with Canada's universal healthcare. They come here so they can get, the Canadian healthcare system is not very efficient. And so that's the go-to socialist, like, counterexample of it doesn't work. It's like, yeah, it doesn't work, but it's affordable. And by the way, it doesn't have to be as inefficient as Canada. If you look at all the countries' wait times, Canada's kind of an outlier. Like, most of them are similar to the American wait times.
Yeah, and it depends on whether you're talking about specialists or generalists. And if you're telling me you don't think specialists are under high load right now, go make a dermatology appointment. Go make an internal medicine. Well, internal medicine is a little better, but like something specific. Ear, nose, and throat specialists, there's quite a lot of them, but go make one of those appointments. You're going to wait a few months. Go make a psychiatry appointment. How many months do you think you're going to wait on that? Like, yes, there's a difference between specialists and generalists, but and also a lot of them, this is a country that's right next to one of the most highest paid physician countries. Of course, you're going to have some border hopping in that example. You get your medicine degree or your medical degree from Canada. Let's see, I can make this money here, or literally go 50 miles south and make hundreds of thousands of dollars because our system is fucked. Like our healthcare costs are out of control.
Right.
So this system sucks. We know that. And just because Canada is having a problem keeping their doctors inside of their borders, that doesn't mean that we need to be doing the same thing. And if we fix that problem, they may go back, or at least that may stop that problem.
Right. It's weird. It's a weird system, but basically, long story short, I registered as a Democrat, which is something I never would have thought I'd ever do growing up. And then I found out that even though I registered as a Democrat, I still don't get to vote for Bernie in the primary. It seems like you have to be in the club for a while before they'll let you vote, which would favor, if you were going to predict which candidate with that policy favors, what would you say?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I want to vote for the first time in my life, and I want to vote for Hillary, right? Like they've already registered from last time she ran.
Let me see if I can find the exact numbers. They've done demographics of Hillary voters. Oh, supporters. There it is. Okay, that's and she polls really well with people who are 55 and over because that makes sense. She's been in the business a long time. She's a recognizable name, and she's been fighting for the right things for a long time. Cool, makes sense. She also polls well with people who make over $200,000. That makes sense. If you have Democratic leanings and you hear someone like Bernie versus someone like her, you don't know Bernie from anyone, and hey, he's going to be hiking up the taxes. Well, everyone has a little self-interest involved, even if you have Democratic leanings. Of course, she polls well with those people. She also polls well with African Americans and currently Latinos, but she's leaking those faster. And that makes sense too. They don't have a lot of access to like, especially people with language barriers for the Latino Americans. They have a hard time staying up on current politics. Of course, that makes a lot of sense. Plus, she's been campaigning for them for a long time, as far as they can tell. Has she ever helped them? No, not to the degree that someone who's really trying to do something would. She has to make deals a lot. She's a career politician, is what they call them. Someone who's looking for the next deal within their current deal, right? They're willing to make big compromises for the next one, right? And so, she's done a lot of mouth game, and they've heard her name a lot. So, yeah, Hillary, cool. African American, same thing. Like, I think it's she's been in that group for a long time. But then there's a lot of critics of them too, because Bill Clinton, on the same time Hillary was running against Obama, Bill came down to Arkansas and signed that law, put his backing behind that law of the fact that he said to double down on crime, on serious crime, which was a bill that like people like the Southern Poverty Law Center was like, hey, that really targets black people. That's really shitty. And he was like, well, I'm just not going to let them, we need to be extra hard on crime. And it's like, well, but there's a criminal justice system that favors or that selects against black people a lot. You want to look at that? He's like, no, we're all for it.
I feel like prison reform would be the way to help black people more than talking points in the debate.
Yeah, and employment issues, like 50% of young African-American males are unemployed. Like that's a big issue. Demilitarizing the police, that's a big issue. These are all things Sanders supports. These are not things that she supports. And she literally answered the question, this is a little off topic for minorities, but she literally answered the question. This guy said, can you promise me that you'll keep us out of war because we've had too much as America? She's like, no, I'm not going to promise that. Listen, I'm going to judiciously use it, and I'll try to be, cool, but I'm not going to. There's a lot of problems right now in the world. So, and she's literally never met there hasn't been a war vote that's come across that she's voting against. So let's just keep that in mind, people. Is she different from a Republican? In some cases. Is she the exact same in many? Yeah. So
yeah, she's not a left. She's in the center. She's a little bit center right actually. So compared to what the GOP is cranking out, she looks pretty leftist. But if you look at us on a world stage, we don't have a right and a left party. We have the Republicans are on the far right, and we have Democrats kind of a little right of center. And then we have Bernie, who's just way off in left field. But he's an outlier. He's not the typical Democrat. That's part of why he's having problems getting the establishment behind him.
Yeah. But yeah, he's putting us more towards countries that actually count. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so she's pulling. They're just different people. But yeah, so people like me who have never been in the system, and people under 35, she had somewhere near 85% are voting for Sanders, Democrats. So because we have something invested in the future of this place, we don't look for. It's just like stocks and bonds. Stability. You look for stability when you get about 55 plus. You want things to not fuck anything up. Even if it costs you a lot of benefit, like you could gain a lot by going into the stock market and taking hedge stock funds, and or not.
But the risk isn't worth it at that point. You don't have any time to recover if it doesn't pay off.
Yeah, but if you go into government bonds, that's what you should do. Financial advisors will tell you that's what you need to do later on in life, because it doesn't matter how many gains you could make. You need to keep what you got beyond all costs. So of course they're more conservative, and that's why they like her policies. But people who are young are like, yeah, fuck it. Let's take a gamble, because look at what we could possibly have. Universal health care. We could have literally everything that puts us back.
And even if we don't, like, I don't have any illusions that we'll get universal health care and free public schooling. Like, those are good goals, but it's hard when you have an obstructionist Congress, which is what Obama had to deal with. But the idea of campaign finance reform, before we can change anything else, whether you agree or disagree on abortion or gay marriage or anything else, before your vote even matters and your voice can even be heard, we have to change the systemic problems that are facing democracy. So, like, I don't know why this is not priority one for people. Let's fix the system first, and then we can start using that system to fix the other problems.
Yeah, that's like the biggest thing to me. I've signed every petition I've seen that has to do with Citizens United. Fuck that shit. Yeah. That shit is bullshit. Nowhere in the world does that. Like, that's one of those things that's really nice about Reddit is you get an international perspective on your ideals. And one of them said, what's the weird shit we do in America that nobody else does? And so many people weighed in. They were like, why do businesses get to put money into the democracy? You guys are democracy, right? I'm like, well, we're a democratic republic. But yeah, it's supposed to be the people. And they're like, why would a business get a vote? And I'm like, no idea. It clearly just money. Like,
no, I had a debate with a friend who's a libertarian who he doesn't see the difference, and maybe I'll play devil's advocate for a minute. Bernie Sanders takes money from unions who are that's big money influencing government. It's just coming from unions instead of CEOs, and unions sometimes are just as anti-democratic as anything else. Like they make you have a membership in the union. Like a lot of times you don't have a choice whether or not to be a part of the union or not. Like if you don't want to be blacklisted, you have to be in the union. Right. So how is that any better than taking money from Goldman Sachs?
Well, a union is explicitly stated or developed so that it can represent the will of its people. A business is not, but not implicitly, not explicitly, nobody even expects that. The CEO votes for what's best for him and for his shareholders.
But don't a majority of Americans have stock in something? Like, aren't we all shareholders? So wouldn't that be in our best interest too?
Well, so you're saying that trickle-down economics?
No, I'm saying if the CEO is trying to maximize profits for his shareholders and like 72% of Americans own share in companies, wouldn't a CEO be working for at least the majority of Americans?
But so that is trickle-down economics. You're saying that if they get
No, I'm not talking about like they're going to invest in infrastructure and invest in jobs and like the money will flow down. I'm just saying like if they're trying to maximize profits for the capitalists, for people who have capital, for people who own stock in a company, and 72% of Americans own stock in companies, then aren't they at least helping that 72% maximize their money?
On the few amount of shares they have? Because you're saying own some shares.
Right.
Are you also trying to say that the 72% of people, that's somehow representative of the number of shares that are out there that are owned? So there's no, like, clearly they're maximizing their own dividends, and if they get a chance, they're buying them all back from the people. And plenty of companies have done that. And the only reason why they give public shares anyway is to gain more money for themselves and for their ventures. So I mean, they're explicitly self-serving. They admit that, right? They're trying to increase their dividends and their profits.
Well, they're legally obligated to, right?
The CEOs?
Yeah. To increase their profit margins.
I don't know if it's legally, but yeah, professionally, right? They're hired to do that.
No, you can actually like part of the contract is that if you're doing something that's that would cost the shareholders money, then you lose. Like it's a breach of contract issue.
Oh, okay, like yeah, okay, contract law. Okay, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was thinking like that would be like saying, are you legally obligated to, um, for example, show up to work? I'd be like, no, and then but if you're like, well, if the contract it says so, I'd be like, oh yeah, absolutely then. Depending on the CEO position, sure. Depending on the company, like for a nonprofit, no.
Yeah, but if it's a for-profit, publicly shared company, you have to do what's best for the shareholders.
Yeah, I mean, if you sign a contract, yeah, you're legally obligated. So, sure, yeah, of course, but that's why you get things like corporations, and that's how you get the split between the ultra wealthy and the not. I mean, they're not looking out for the little guy, and the little guy doesn't benefit when they benefit. That's just that's trickle down economics. That doesn't work because they're going to buy as every chance they're going to get. It's a closed system money, so every chance they're going to get, they're going to maximize their profits, which is good, but that also necessarily means that there's less money out in the market. And the people putting money into trust funds and things like that are stagnating that money, which is fine. That's good for them. But that's why people say you need an economic stimulus by redistributing some of that wealth, because otherwise it's all going to keep trickling up. It's a rigged game. I don't know of any economist who doesn't think it's a rigged game. I mean, I haven't read all of them. I haven't even read the majority of them. So maybe there are some that say that. But it's constantly talked about as like a rigged game. And the fact that economic stimulus comes in the way of adding in outside money from foreign exporting and things like that. So
yeah, it was weird the debate because I'm not 100% behind unions. I think it's shitty to force somebody to be part of a union, for example.
Yeah.
But to equivocate union money with like CEO Goldman Sachs, like Wall Street money, I was like, I don't know if that's the same thing, because unions are actually, at least on paper, supposed to represent the needs of the working man. That's the whole point of them. That's why we have 2-day weekends and child labor laws, right? Because unions push for that. So I don't know if you, like, at least in theory, they're going to be working more to help the common man than the CEOs.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least that's their goal. Like, is there corruption? Yes, every system has its flaws. That's the part that bugs me. It's the false dichotomy. They're like, or yeah, you prove someone else wrong and therefore you're right. And I'm like, no, that just means it's got its flaws. Everything does. I mean, but okay, they might as well try communism because capitalism has its flaws. That's silly. Like, no, they both have flaws. Let's do the one that has the least chance of screwing people over. It's what made us a democracy rather than a monarchy. Yes, there's flaws in both. That's the dumb thing to point out, of course. But this one is less likely to become corrupt as quickly.
Yeah.
I think.
So, quick political rant, but yeah, long story short, I registered as a Democrat and now I don't get to vote in the primary anyway because I missed it by like 3 weeks.
Me too. I missed it by like a week or two, and I was like, wait a minute. So, if I register and you show that, because you show that I'm a member of this county, and that I am that you verified and everything, even if that comes in time, I still can't vote. She's like, no. I was like, what the fuck? Why? Like, what's the holding that back? She's like, it's just the law. It's just what we decided that needs to happen. And I was like, right, I know. Oh, we've always done it that way. Guess what? We had slaves for that reason.
Yeah, and it's not even a law. It's just like the Democratic National Convention decided that's how they were going to do it in that state. It's just party. Like people assume the two-party system and the primaries and the caucuses is some kind of in the Constitution somewhere. It's just something they do, and they just do it because they have a monopoly of the power. They can do whatever they want. They can decide who speaks at the debates and how long you have to be a member of the party to vote, or even if you have to be a member of the party to vote. Some of them have open primaries.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really want to care about politics, and I hate being like cock blocked every time I try and get involved because I haven't been part of the system for as long as the insiders.
Yeah, not a big fan, but whatever. Here we are. That actually brings us to a good point here, which is so the topic of today, I think, is one of these game changers. I love these. It's like whenever I listen to a podcast, someone else's podcast, and I'm introduced to a topic that I constantly reference from then on. Mm-hmm. I find that like a really cool idea.
Yeah, like when you first learn about cognitive dissonance theory, and you're like, holy shit, that happens all the time in everything.
Yeah. Or self-perception theory is one of the big ones I bring up a lot, where we don't know why we do beforehand. We make up the reason after.
Fundamental attribution error.
Yeah, these are big ones. This one for me was a huge one, Kafkatrapping, because someone finally put it down. I was like, there we go. Sometimes I have a hard time putting my finger on something. I'm like, I feel like this is wrong, and I'm trying to identify where it is, but you're being slippery. You're trying to argue to be right, and I'm just trying to figure out why maybe I have a point. Wish you would help here. Oh, okay, never mind. This guy wrote a really good topic of it. There's an article by a guy named Eric Raymond. It's on ibiblio.org. It doesn't matter where it is. The point is he talks about this thing called Kafkatrapping.
What's Kafkatrapping?
So this is pointed at what some people call the regressive left. Do you have any idea of? Have you ever heard that term?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of infighting with among liberals and atheists and freethinkers and skeptics. We're really good at splintering the movement, right? Like you got atheism plus, you have like all these little things that branch off and like, no, I'm my own thing. I'm different from the others. Mm-hmm. So the big debate right now, and if you've been following Richard Dawkins on Twitter, you probably have caught wind of this, is the regressive left. So you've got the Ben Afflecks of the world who will shout racism when you criticize Islam, right? That's like one extreme, like a huge caricature of that side of the left, right? And then on the other side of the left, you have like his debate partner, the person going against him, Sam Harris, who's saying it's not racism, it's just calling things out. Like if we're liberal, we should be liberal everywhere. And obviously there's a bias in the way I'm even explaining this because I used a pretty poor example with Ben Affleck. He's kind of a douche. But the regressive left, that term gets used by people that are more on the Sam Harris side of the debate, or even, I guess the Ben Affleck on that side would be the Richard Dawkins, right? Where you'll just say something incredibly unsavvy on Twitter, and something that's you're like, wait, why would you say that? That's going to piss off a lot of people,
right? Okay, so my understanding of this is that liberalism was originally, and this is, who knows if this is true, but this is the idea, is that liberalism was originally founded so that we could have conversations about things that are, there's nothing holy, there's nothing sacred. No idea is untouchable, no matter who you are.
It's a counter movement to conservatism where there are certain sacred cows that we do because that's how it's always been done. Like this tendency to reverence tradition and authority is a conservative sort of bend, and liberalism is kind of the opposite of that, where just because it's old or sacred or how we've always done it doesn't mean we shouldn't question it and move forward.
Right, and that necessarily, from my understanding, my thoughts on it at least, necessarily means that we need to be able to talk about things openly. So, because a conservative tactic would be to, like you said, cock block you, right? But in this case, it would be to make you stop talking about it. So, if you say something like if I say like, yeah, well, but I mean, should the rich have all the money? And they're like, oh, see, just why would you even? That's ridiculous. Or like, well, but is God true? And then they're like, oh, dude, you can't even question that.
There are taboos, right? Like, or if you criticize religion, it's like, oh, well, religion deserves respect. And you're like, why? That there is not a conservative question to ask when someone says religion deserves respect.
And what's the tactic to shut you up? If you say why is God important? Why do we need God to be moral?
Right. And
how are they going to respond?
I don't know. What will they say?
Oh, I mean, typically in my experience, it's been like, oh, there's been like all of a sudden you're a bad person, right? So they attribute a bad thing to you, and then they go, how could you even ask that? Are you serious? You can't not know that. They're affronted by you even exploring the topic.
Right. Or if you, going back to the Islam debate, like, Islam is pretty aggressive and fanatical. Oh, then instead of addressing that point, they will, throw shade on you and say like, oh, you're a racist then. You hate Muslims, which is,
right.
Because Muslims are race.
So people in the, I guess what you would call the non-regressive left, but the that side of liberals, like the Sam Harris maybe side of liberals, would be people who side with Socrates and say, there's nothing not worth questioning, and I'll die asking the right questions if I need to, but there's nothing sacred. We can question everything, including like, how do I know I'm not a pedophile? And then you're like,
we can certainly challenge the things that we don't want to challenge.
Yeah, an unexamined life is not worth living. Mm-hmm. And so that's the driving principle from my understanding. And from the other side, it's like, no. So the regressive left, so an example of this would be like, Islamophobia, the people who shout Islamophobia. And there are people who are Islamophobic. That's Fox News. Good Lord, have you ever seen people explain more things?
Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yes. And so, but the question is you end up finding yourself in arguments with these people, and you end up thinking like, well, I just feel like I'm getting the raw end of the deal here. I don't feel like we're holding on to liberal values. It feels a lot like, and I've said this out loud to some of these people. I said, I have a lot of these same defenses, or I have to defend myself a lot like this against conservatives. I want you to know that this is the same tactic that conservatives use or Christians use whenever I question things. They say, you're a horrible person. How could you?
And I don't like on the other side of the debate, like there tends to be sort of a dismissing of that whole movement as social justice warriors or whatever you want to call them. Like they're just social justice warriors. It's like, why is that a derogative? Like if social justice is something we should all be fighting for, we shouldn't. I don't want to dismiss them as ill-intentioned people, but there is something to the idea of, yes, you should fight for social justice, but let's not abandon our critical thinking and our skepticism.
This has to do with the whole thing of, and I want everybody to look at ourselves and say this. I have to admit, when somebody criticized me this, I had to take a minute and go, fuck, you're right. I didn't want to say this. As a guy who is a scientist of humans, I had to admit that I have this bias. And when I was called on it, I was like, fuck, you're right. Because I started talking about why Christians believe the way they do, right? We talk about it on this podcast. Mm-hmm. And at one point, there was a Christian who said, yeah, but why don't you look at yourselves that way? How aren't you a product of your environment? Why don't you say, why are atheists atheists? And look at environmental variables. And I was like, I'll be damned. You're right. Yeah, I guess I do. Like, I believe that people end up where they end up because of environmental variables. You're right. I need to start looking at what lands people into atheists as environmental rather than just, oh, this is the right position, right?
Right.
So I mean, you're right. So we have to look at that ourselves and think the same things. And so with this, how was I paralleling that? There, two people. So what? Sometimes if you believe that we can fall victim to things like that, right there, those biases, with purely great intent, with nothing but the best intent. I wish everybody is the happiest in the world, and if I have a chance to help make someone stay happier, I'm going to do it. Mm-hmm. I'm a good person. If I fall on the wrong side of a topic, which I had before, gay marriage, I used to be vocal against it when I was.
Yeah, me too. I remember having a debate with one of our gay friends about why it wasn't gay marriage; it was don't ask, don't tell, and why that was a good policy.
Yeah.
We're wrong about it.
Things I'm not proud of, but I had every good intention. I thought I was right, and I still loved people and hoped everyone was happy. You have to realize that, people on all sides of things are just doing the best they can with what they've got. There's bad people, sure, but that's not the majority, and that shouldn't be your default assumption. So the same thing here is just, we have to look at this and say, am I doing something that's like that is shitty? If you are, it's not your fault. Just change. Like, it's like when parents get upset whenever I tell them they're doing something wrong with their kid, and then it insinuates that they're the reason why their kid is acting crazy and is fighting in school. Then they get kind of defensive, and I'm like, no, dude, it's not. You are trying to be the best parent you can with what you've got. You just didn't know that this was feeding into it. That's it. You're still a good person. I still like you. You're a good client, or whatever. But the same thing here. If you fall into one of these traps, realize that everyone does. I don't know, but it's this idea of how would you be? Okay, so we're getting straight into Kafkatrapping. We won't get into the generalities, but Kafkatrapping it's based on this book by Franz Kafka, I guess. It's called The Trial. I don't even know if it's a book, actually. But anyway, in it, the protagonist, Joseph K., is accused of crimes of nature, which are never really actually specified, because that's irrelevant, right? The author leaves that vague because on purpose. It's like The Mist, the movie. They make the monsters vague because that's not the point. And if you highlight that, you don't want people to get off on that as an ad. So,
right.
But eventually,
or like the laws in 1984, where there aren't really any laws. You just have to have good think instead of bad think.
And it's kept intentionally vague. You don't want people to the reader to get caught up in that, right? You're like, don't worry, it's out there. It's like a thought experiment where you go, doesn't matter. This is how it is, okay? In fact, he ends up getting enmeshed in this trial, and it's a process designed to denigrate him, humiliate him, and destroy him, whether or not he is in fact committed of any crime at all, right? So he gets put on this trial, and the whole point of the trial, it's like whenever, like the Benghazi stuff with Hillary. Now, there was some shady shit, sure, but hopefully, but is she a traitor, right? No, come on, I don't think she is, at least. I didn't come to that conclusion. And really, we know why the Republicans did it. It was to degrade, humiliate, and destroy her, right?
Right.
So Kafkatrapping is that. It's challenging an assertion that's kind of irrelevant, even if you don't believe it's true. It's just to get them to look bad. Mm-hmm. So he's pointing out that, hey, I just want to let you guys know that it's possible we're doing that in the left too. For example, he says it comes in many different variables or variations, but here's one of them. So he calls this model C. So it says, quote, even if you do not feel yourself to be guilty of blank, you are guilty because you have benefited from the blank. Or benefited from the blank behavior of others in the system. So for example, take sin. Even if you do not feel yourself to be guilty of sin, you are guilty because you have benefited from the sin behavior of others in the system, right? So even the perfect people live in a fallen world. That's Kafkatrapping, right? Now let's take an example from the left, because that's beef from the right. Even if you do not feel yourself to be guilty of let's say sexism or racism,
Sure.
you are guilty because you have benefited from the racism behavior of others in the system. And while that's absolutely true, like you have benefited from it, but you're not necessarily guilty of it. You know, like I have been racist in the past, and anytime I am, I'm like, fuck, I did that thing. Thanks for calling me on that. Now I won't do that. You know, because if you say something like one time I gave a person a ride, and I was a little worried, and it was a homeless man, or he was a very almost homeless man. He didn't have his own home. He had a home to live in. And I gave him a ride home, and we went to this really bad part of the neighborhood. And the first thought that came to my mind was like, am I about to get murdered? And then I was like, would I have thought that same thing if that person was white? And I was like, maybe, but I can't be sure. I might have been racist right there. I need to cut that shit out, right? Mm-hmm. That was a real example that happened. And then I felt bad about it. But if I had never had these thoughts, it doesn't, like, Jesus, is he a racist? Because,
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, okay, he was. Bad example.
He told the Samaritan woman that she deserved the scraps from the table like the dogs because she wasn't a Jew.
Okay, so the Dalai Lama. Let's say the Dalai Lama. Let's say he's as good as everybody says he is. Let's just pretend. Remember, this is a hypothetical. Is he racist? Is he guilty of racism because he's benefited from a racist society?
Right, and if he's as good as everyone says, then no.
Right, logic and philosophy says no. But modern movements say, yeah. I mean, yeah, you're a racist. And then you just need to admit that and tie onto it. And that doesn't sit well with people, because I'm like, oh, man, I don't.
Would you make a distinction between racist and benefiting from a privilege?
Yeah, of course.
Because I feel like, yeah, we all benefit from a system. I'm not going to deny white privilege. White privilege is undeniable, right? Like if you're just objectively, like it's just undeniable. I've got a very white heavy demographic that I teach, and they're always pushing back against the idea of white privilege. And I'm like, guys, seriously though, if you could do it all over again, would you choose to be born Hispanic or black in this city that we're in right now? And they're like, no. And I'm like, why not? Because it would be harder. Well, that's white privilege. It's not your fault. I'm not blaming you for it, but you have to acknowledge that it's there.
Yeah, and it's situational, of course. Like, is it white privilege inside of Harlem if you lived there? No,
right.
Not in that living situation, but if you applied for a job.
And I'm actually one of the few white people that I know that's gotten to have the racism the other way, where I lived in South Korea, which is very racist against non-Koreans. It's not just racist, it's nationalist, right? So even like Japanese people are discriminated against. But I was the assumption there was that I had AIDS because I was from America and I was white. So therefore I have a lot of promiscuous sex with no condoms. And so you actually have to, before you can get a job there, you have to take an AIDS test just to prove that you're not infested.
If you're white.
Yeah. If you're white, if you're from America. Yeah. So at that point I didn't have white privilege. I had the white privilege to go to South Korea. That was a privileged thing to do. But once I was there, my white privilege was no longer as useful as if I had looked South Korean. So
if one of your friends who was Korean was one of your buddies and you guys are friends and he's totally not racist, would you call him racist because he didn't have to take an AIDS test?
No, I would. That would be
privilege.
Weird,
right?
I don't even know why that would be helpful. What would that do?
Exactly. I mean, it's okay. So racism, it's tough because it's absolutely true. We benefit from this. I once proved this to a friend of mine who asked me, he's like, I just don't think that it's as big of a deal. I really do think we're living in a post-racial society. And I was like, great. Okay. So next time you apply for a job, especially a good one, put African-American on there. Just do it. You have any qualms with that? And he's like, well, I mean, I'm not going to misrepresent. And he starts like, backtracking. I was like, oh, no, just do it. I mean, you just said that variable does not matter. Then just put it down. That's fine.
Yeah. Just say it was an accident when they meet you in person. Be like, oh, sorry, checked the wrong box. But if you don't think it's gonna harm your chances of getting the job, go for it. That would fly in the face of any research we've done on this, where we've actually done an experiment and you're less likely to get the job. But yeah, try it out. Put your money where your mouth is.
But I was afraid if I start putting, here's what happens with anyone whenever you give experiments and reasons why. They're like, tell me about that, and you tell it to them, and they start trying to pick it apart, and you're like, great, maybe. But that doesn't mean that you're right. Like, yes, there may have been flaws in this, but it's still, unless you have shown that this is not the case, we need to fall for this one. We need to say, well, maybe this.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid they're going to start picking it apart and then say false dichotomy. Say like, well, then mine's true, and it's like that's not how it works. But Yeah, so instead I just made him face it himself. I was like, really? Okay, cool. So next big time job you get when you get out of undergrad, because he's an undergrad, and just circle African American. It'll be fine, right? Post-racial
Right.
society. So yeah, obviously white privilege is the thing, but I don't believe that makes you racist. Now, moving on to sexism or homophobia, it's the same thing. You yourself are homophobic because you benefit from it. Now, this one isn't quite as common, but this is a good starting point because it's not. You want to move from things that people don't think is too controversial to things that are like, well, okay, I can see that. So there's another variant. This is model P. So even if you do not feel yourself to be guilty of sin, we'll say sin, you are guilty because you have a privileged position in the sinful system. This is a very close variant, right? This is about being privileged. So you're not being privileged does not make you guilty. That's the underlying assertion that would necessarily follow if this is a fallacy, right? If this quote, which we've already kind of addressed. But here's where it gets a little. Here's where you start to see where this applies. Because what he's saying is he's like right. So, yeah, they understand the person who initiates this Kafka trap understands that the person didn't do a behavior like that falls under that subset, but it would be useful if they could put that person under that mantle. Okay, well, hold on. We'll move on. So, okay. Here we go. So this one is prevalent in. I'm going to go ahead and use the example right away. So so this is model L. Quote, your insistence on applying rational skepticism and evaluating assertions of pervasive sexism itself demonstrates that you are sexist. Now, this one may sound a little more common.
Yeah, and when you phrase it that way, it sounds blatantly idiotic or fallacious. So why is it more common?
I've had this one. Haven't you had this one? Haven't you?
No, I'm not doubting that's more common. I'm just confused because when you look at it just in those bare bones, your willingness to apply skepticism to this assertion makes you sexist. It sounds on the face of it like prima facie just an idiotic thing to say, and yet it's a very common thing to hear.
Yeah, it is. And this happens, unfortunately, and these are important. Like this author mentions this too, like laboriously. I've seen JT write, and he'll laboriously say, listen, I love Bernie Sanders. I love him. He's great. If he can make it, I love it. He's awesome. I love it. He's awesome. He's awesome. He's awesome. I love it. That makes 20 times. Good. Here's why I don't think he can make it. And then he goes, again, I like Bernie Sanders. I hope he wins. He deserves to win. He's the best candidate. He will make us the country need to be. And then the comments are like, dude, what the fuck, man? You need to support Bernie. And I'm like, because why don't you like him? He's realistic. And he's like, I said
that so many times.
Yeah. So yeah. I'm admitting that people in my own movement, I love Bernie Sanders. I'm unabashed about it. Do this too. I'm not pointing fingers. We all do this. But I'm saying when you see it, you need to call it out. And it does happen with sin. Right. Is sin necessarily, like that bad? Like, are we sure this is a sin? And they're like, oh, it's exactly what a sinful person would say. You want sin to be a big thing? It's the same thing with racism, sexualism, homophobia. No one's denying that those things exist. Sin, yes, but racism, sexism, homophobia, oppression, motherfucker, yes, especially in America. We got that shit in spades. But in some cases, you want to be like, oh, is that the case? Now, let me give you a classic example involving race. And this is a questionable one. I don't know if I was right or wrong. But I was like, here's an example of me getting owned because of it. I was in multicultural psychology, and our professor is a bit of a, she's very very super left, regressive left, if you will. This is her job to be that, right? That's what she researches. And so one of the individuals in the class, he was like, well, I had an incident where I went to Ajax. It's a place on the square here. It's a restaurant. I went to this restaurant, and I sat down, and I got horrible service. It's because they're racist. And I was like, is that which place? And he goes, Ajax. And I was like, oh, that's funny. I just went to Ajax for lunch 2 days ago, and I had horrible service. And then she looked at me, and she was like, what are you trying to say there? And I was like, well, no, I'm just wondering, was it racism that promoted it? Like, was your server white? And she's like, no, why are you even asking this? I'm like, well, no, I just want to look, if her server was black, wouldn't we be like, well, maybe not, or maybe so, but probably not. I'm just wondering. And then she's like, but what's the usefulness of that? What's the point of that? And I was like, well, I don't want him to go forward thinking, well, Ajax, I don't want to go to Ajax again. They're racist there. If they're not racist, like that seems shitty, or it's just wrong. Don't we want to try to be right? I mean, do you want to go around assuming everyone's a racist? That sounds like a horrible life. What if I was mean to you one day, And I was like, man, you just need to, you were going to be here on time and you weren't, dude. I can't believe that. And then you were like, let me say, it's because I'm black, you know? And then it's like, well, no, dude, that has nothing to do with it. I literally just had this conversation with the last 5 people that walked through the door. They were all white. And then they're like, why are you even doing that? What's the point of that? Just admit it's racist and, or whatever. And this could be sexist, sin. It could be anything, but that fucking bugs me. That bugs the shit out of me. I'm like, no, you should be able to ask questions. And don't you want to try to be true? Like, if I think to myself, like, if I was in Korea and I went in and was like, hey, can I get a pizza? And I got it. And they left off one of my toppings. And I'm like, fuck, it's because I'm white. Like, is it true or not? I'd really want to examine that. I'd be like, I wonder if they leave it off all white people's stuff.
Right. Or more commonly, sometimes taxis wouldn't pull over and pick you up if you're white because they don't want to deal with you not. And I understand. It's because I don't speak Korean, probably, if I'm white. Like, that's a safe assumption to make. And you don't want to deal with someone that can't speak Korean if you don't speak very good English. But if it wasn't because I was white, if they were just busy or they didn't see me, like, and would I want to know that? Or is it just more fun to assume that I'm being discriminated against because of my skin color?
I know. And what kind of life are you going to live if you just allow yourself to assume all instances are sexism, racism, homophobia, you know, sin, or atheism, or hate for your sin or your religion or whatever? It's going to lead to a persecution complex. Oh, that's weird. That is something that we hear a lot of people on the regressive left, is that they have a persecution complex. Like,
is there a term besides regressive left that we can use? Because even that sounds a little like dismissive. And I don't know if is there like a less biased way of talking about that position?
I don't know. Is there? We can't say hyper left. You can't say extremists. You can't say social justice warrior, because I feel like that's a good term, but it's also been used poorly.
Yeah, it's derogative too. I don't know. Maybe our listeners can tell us how would they identify themselves as inside that movement?
The most important thing I think that separates these two is a desire to know the truth, right? There is no capital T truth, but get as close as we can, right? Eliminate as much bias as possible and really determine whether a situation happens or not. I value that. That side doesn't. That's the difference, I think.
Right. And they would argue, because I've been listening to a lot of debates, a lot of podcasts are talking about this right now, and I've listened to a lot of debates between these points of view. If you've heard atheistically speaking, that's been a theme for them recently. And the counter argument would be the idea, the privilege of being able to prioritize a search for truth and be able to say what you want and just look at things skeptically is something that we as white males in this movement can do, but we've dominated the conversation so long that like a black male, but when a black male in the movement says this and this, instead of saying, well, are you sure, and immediately calling into question, he would say that we've had our conversation so much already that maybe just let that sit unopposed and just let them be able to at least feel like they're being heard.
Yeah, my response to that is the same thing I said with the Anita Sarkeesian thing, where I got into a discussion with, or we all did, with Linnea Glasser, Russell's wife. Mm-hmm. And I like Linnea. She's a good person. We've had her on the podcast a couple times on the other one. And but she mentioned, she was just like, hey, why don't you guys just do this thing that they call signal boosting, which means like, minorities don't get enough airtime. Everyone hopefully
let them have their say without trying to like shoot it down.
Right. That asks me to change my values. And I was like, I see that. And I see that there's some benefit to that. But you're asking me to change my values of truth. And I don't care who you are. I would give you the microphone, but I wouldn't not question you subsequently. I would say, what's your point of view? And then they say it. And then I go, well, that's interesting. What about this? And I don't. And so my criticism is this. Because what I said was, I was like, I don't think you believe that either. I think that sounds good, but I don't think you really believe that. So my question to her was, all right, so if someone got up there and they happened to be African American or Native American, and I have Native American blood, so I can especially get with this, but I bring on a full-blooded Native American. I bring them on the show. I'm like, here you go. Doesn't matter what you're going to say. I just want you to say it. And they're like, good. Listen, we need to get the Jews out of America. We need to make ovens. We need to make gas chambers. We need to turn them on. And we need to kill all the Jews. Surely we can all agree at that point that I should be like, should we? Oh, right. But what if they say something like, or on the other side, if they say like, I feel like Native Americans are really getting fucked. We're getting fucked, and we need to have some sort of system that helps us get back on our feet. I don't think anyone would question that. But we're talking about the places in between where there's demonstrably false things that someone might say. Like the research shows that the more media you watch changes your opinion, which is Anita Sarkeesian's point. And I was like, does not show that. Nope, showed it's not the case. Like, can't I say that? Or at least say, are you familiar with the literature that has shown?
And this gets into the safe spaces debate. I think context and setting might have something to do with it too. Like if I'm going to a rally, let's go back to Black atheists, because they're a minority inside of a minority, right? If you're not a Christian, you're a Black person, you're already kind of cutting yourself off from a lot of your community.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, there's not a lot of Black faces in the atheist conferences, which is another problem. So like I go into a speaker who's talking about racism, and he says something like, and as a white person, you in this audience, you have never experienced racism. You don't know what it's like. Now, to me, in my specific case, that's not true. I have experienced racism, not to the level that a Black person in America has, but being a white person in South Korea, I've been on the other side of it. Right. But I don't know if that's the time or the place for me to stand up and be like, sir, actually, no, you made a generalization. I myself, that's a factually inaccurate statement. I have experienced racism as well. But if I was just in a conversation with a guy and he accused me of being blind to racism and I've never experienced it, then I would point out like, no, I have experienced some level of racism. It's not the same as what you've gone through, but for at least 2 years of my life, I lived in that system where I was a minority, and I understand that it sucks. So that is an assumption that you made that's not accurate.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's time and place. I agree. And that's going to add some wiggle room to it.
So then you have to decide like where, because a lot of this is taking place on Twitter and Facebook. Like, is that a safe space where you can just say what you want and have your signal boosted, or is it a place where we should value being corrected if we're wrong, even if we are being corrected by a privileged position?
It's so difficult holding a nuanced position. That's the problem, because like when All Lives Matter hashtag came out, I was like, well, yeah, but Black Lives Matter because all lives matter. I don't think they disagree with you, but the reason why you're saying that is pretty shitty. And when they were like, Blue Lives Matter, I was like, that's much worse, because no one's going to disagree that, if a police officer dies, that's a sad thing.
Right.
But if someone's getting gunned down innocently.
Yeah, you have to. It's like, why are there gay pride parades? Like, yeah, straight people should be happy to be straight, but the reason they need to have gay pride parades or Black Lives Matter is because they're getting fucked by the majority.
Yeah,
so we're shedding light on that and boosting the signal, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I agree. I don't know. I just think, listen, I've got a value where I hope that humanity moves more and more towards truth. Right. And
being willing to self-evaluate and correct yourself if you're not
right.
If reality isn't accurate.
And I'm terrified of extremism, right? Like I've had to fight it literally in real life and also figuratively or mentally a lot of times when we talk about things. Mm-hmm. And I just want to make sure no one ever gets there, myself especially, never falls into extremism. And the only mechanism I can think of that fixes that is open discourse. I don't, the fact that I just think, man, I don't know. That's a difficult one. I don't know.
Because I think there is a space for signal boosting, because it's like feminism, right? Where it's like, well, if you're a feminist, are you saying that you don't think men's problems matter? Because men have a lot of things that are shitty in our society that don't get addressed by feminism. And yes, I think men's lives are important too, but I feel like the reason feminism needed to happen was because the pendulum had swung so far in the other direction that we had to kind of focus our efforts on that. So I do understand the need for signal boosting and for giving people a voice who feel like they're not being heard. Just getting to listen to someone else. We don't see them in movies. We don't see them in stories. Like it's not a position that we tend to get to see represented. Whereas white people, like, stories are just a dime a dozen. So I see the need for that, but I also see the need for being willing to be skeptical about your own position, and especially if it's a position that you hold very close to your heart, like racism or sexism or anything. Like, those tend to be very emotionally driven positions.
But here again, I'm going to say something that I find myself saying to the conservative individuals or the Christian individuals is, dude, we can do both. Like, when people talk about men's rights, I'm like, well, hang on, wait till women's rights. I'm like, how about both? Like, if I see someone suffering, I don't care if it's a man or a female, I'm going to help. And I realize women have it worst off. But also, can't we do both? Like, if like every day I feel like I fight against some kind of gender discrimination. Somebody says some dumb shit like, men's weights are over here, women's weights are over there, and it's less. And I'm like, dude, there are girls that are I go to CrossFit. Some of those girls could straight up outlift the fuck out of me. Some of them work out for like 3 hours a day. That's a sexist thing to say. Why don't you just say, beginner level over here, or lower weights here, higher weights there. Shit like that. Right. It's the little stuff. And I find myself saying that, but then someone's like, "Oh, come on, can't we just, just work out?" I'm like, "Can't we do both?" Like, I'm not asking you to change anything. I'm just saying, be a little more aware. So I think the same thing for the gender. It's not an adversarial thing. I'm not asking you to change the way that you do weights. I'm just saying, when you talk about it, maybe do this. We can do both. We can weight lift and have a great time, and also not be so sexist, because you're necessarily saying that women should be lifting these lower weights. So what if they want to be, what if they really enjoy CrossFit and they want to get big? They suddenly think, oh, I don't want to be in the men's side. Why can't we do both? And so the same thing with the men's and women's rights, or the signal boosting. Like, why can't you signal boost, but also ask questions? Like, say, hey, I'm going to bring on this minority onto the show because they don't get enough airtime. And you bring them on and you say, all right, so what's up? And they start talking, and then they go, yeah, and Jews need to die. Yeah, can't we be like, hey, I gave you that microphone, but I'm also a little curious about this position. Could you tell me about Jews need to die?
Right,
can't
which
you
is an
do
extreme
both?
example. But yeah, if someone says something wrong, can't we also signal boost them and correct, or at least have them re-examine their statements?
Exactly. And that's the nuance that people have a hard time with. As soon as somebody asks a question, this is, whenever people pretend like this is a real thing, I'm just like, God, I've never met anyone who knows about psychological processes who doesn't think this is a good idea. You can't, anytime someone questions against you, remember, language is new, right? We respond to all stimuli the same, whether it's verbal or, in our minds, we do imagery and we do concepts. We come idea, like if I say conceptually pedophilia, that doesn't mean anything to a dog. The dog's just like, doesn't change its life. To us, we have a concept in our mind, and when it triggers, we go, ugh. And you can have something called moral disgust. You can have a true facial change, like ugh, like disgust. We respond to the idea of moral concept of pedophilia the same way we would rotten meat. If someone's like, hey, here, eat this, we're like, ugh. We respond to all stimuli the same because we're not built for concepts. We're built for physical things. And so when people see someone who's against their concept, they just see them as against themselves. And so they have a fight or flight. And so they go, enemy. And I'm like, stop that. That is a bias. So when people are like, oh, you're the enemy because you are criticizing something this person says, I'm like, now you're just being a fucking primate. Chill. Look, I'm not. I'm with you. How many times have you said that? I'm like, dude, I'm on your side. Yeah, right. And they're always like, oh, now you got to call yourself that. I'm like, all right, fine. Listen, I'm an ally. And they're like, self-described ally. These are real arguments I've had.
Keep mansplaining.
Yeah, mansplaining. I'm like, it doesn't make it. That's an ad hominem. It doesn't make it any less real because a man said it. I get it. Men have had a lot of airtime, but that doesn't mean the answer isn't either or. It's, hey, get women more. But guys got to talk to, but women more, And it's the whole notion I think is absurd.
And taking it away from the moral element, because I feel like we get very wrapped up in what's right, what's the right thing to do. But let's just look at I think it's a healthy way to look at anything, the functional analysis, where you say, what is this? Is this helping what I want to happen? Is this causing more harm to what I want to happen? And if you're on that part of the left that tends to take umbrage with these sorts of things, like if you're on that Ben Affleck side where you're like, that's just gross, that's racist, that's just gross, like, think for a minute, what's gonna help your cause better? Are you gonna alienate somebody who's also on the left who might have a different opinion of you? Is that gonna change his mind? Is that gonna make Sam Harris go, you're right, I am gross and racist, I don't even know why I'm talking right now? Like, I feel like if we just see what's helpful, it could make your cause better. Am I way off in left field here?
I want to be straight up honest with you. I do a lot of reading of feminist literature. Like, I can't tell you, probably every day I read about 30 minutes to an hour because I want to be wrong. I like gender equality. I'm all about it. I like racial equality. I'm all about it. Like, I just want to be. And so when I find myself against someone who says they're a feminist, which I rarely do. Usually it's like feminists like, yeah, we're all. But why I'm like, man, feminism has a PR problem. Let me figure this out. Maybe I must be wrong here. I've been wrong in the past when I thought people were wrong. I'm gonna read it. There's something called tone policing. Have you heard about this?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. It's this. It's feminist literature, but it says that the assertion. I'll present it as fairly as I can. It says that there's such thing as called righteous anger. That's the heart of it. Mm-hmm. Christians will say this too. There's, Jesus had righteous anger whenever he threw people out and literally whipped people.
Yeah.
Human adults. He hit people, human adults, with a piece of a cow to get them out of and because he's righteously angry, there's a sacred thing this person was doing. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like you could have probably addressed that differently. You could have been like, get out. I have the authority. And if they say no, then he can go to the authority. And if they don't have the authority, the authoritative power, are you really doing any good by driving out? Aren't they just going to show back up with the authoritative power?
Aren't
They
you
are.
get yourself crucified if you carry on that way?
Yeah, aren't you going to get yourself banned from the temple if you act that way? Yeah, you've now got yourself out of any influence you could have had. I don't believe in this idea of righteous anger. I believe it can be done in certain cases. Like you and I get upset about some things like Christianity, or like when someone makes a stupid argument and we're like, oh, how can they believe that way? But not to the person. Like never.
Right, and we don't consider that a useful thing. It's a natural thing, but we don't like unleash the rage on them thinking it's going to change their minds. We might vent about it off camera just so we can get out of our system, but it's not like, oh man, I'm so pissed right now. I can't wait to go in there and fix these problems with my angry face.
Because you and I are both familiar, and you tangentially so, but very much so, are familiar with psychology in general. Like it's called inoculation effect. And anytime I bring this up, I just goes dead space. I'm like, oh, hang on, I'm with you. I'm trying to help you signal boost here. I'm trying to help. To do that, you got to be careful. There's this thing called inoculation effect. You can Google it if you don't believe me, but I'll just summarize it. It's, whenever every time you shut down someone's argument, but not for a good reason, you haven't changed their mind, you have successfully increased their confidence that they were right. And if you've done some of that with a majority power, fuck, like you're hurting yourself here. Is that worth it? This quote unquote righteous anger. I get being angry. I can't tell you how many internet arguments I've had where people start saying, only stupid people think that. And I'm like, no, I'm not dumb. You're being a dick. And so instead, I go, take a couple of 5 deep breaths. That's nobody's arguing that the minority has to be the better person. Like you and I are non-believers. We've had a small taste of, in one context, being the minority in a certain context, right? Not the same. I'm not saying that. No one's saying that. But I'm saying that, has it ever helped when we've lashed out at people? No. Usually at that point, we've given up on the idea. We're like, you know what? No, fuck you. You're not going to change your mind. Fuck you. And then if someone
this is just going to make me feel better. That's about all you can salvage out of that argument at that point.
Yeah.
Because so once you go into angry mode, you've kind of given up any hope of changing the minds.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that, but you have to know that that's what's happening. So for them to say, no, you should change your mind, and I'm going to yell at you, I'm like, oh man, you got to be careful. You're actually hurting our movement, gender equality.
Tone policing.
Don't do it. Yeah, no, tone policing. I'm like, you can't just label something you don't like and pretend that there's a moral value to it. That doesn't.
I don't get why people are so pro science until the science doesn't. It's like, hey, actually, if you're just purely scientific, you should know the science has been done on this, like on trigger warnings or on changing people's minds. There's actually a lot of good science on how to convince people of things and how to help people overcome trauma or whatever, right? Like all these issues. And they just don't want to hear it because it's not what they're currently doing.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, the natural response is to get angry in those situations. And you're perfectly right in getting frustrated, right?
Right.
But I'm just saying, that's fine, get frustrated. But if you're confronting someone with that frustration, you make sure it's an educated exchange. Know that I'm not going to change the person's mind, and I'm likely going to hurt my movement, but fuck him. You're right. I've done that before, where I'm like, you know what, fuck you, buddy. I know this is actively hurting me, but fuck you. I know I got to come to this, whatever. Let's say it's a cafe, and the guy's being a dick.
Sometimes you're going to cut off your nose to spite your face, but you should at least know that's what you're doing. You should be aware of that before you do it.
Yeah, it's like if somebody was like like if I'm walking by in a mall, and there's a black person in front of me and I'm behind him, and then I hear someone as I'm walking by, a white bystander go, oh, that fucking, and he says the N-word, and then I'll be like, hey, do you really think that's something you want to say? I don't think you should be calling people that. That's really shitty. And then if the guy's like, he's like, well, I guess not. Like, I have a chance to change his mind. Or he's probably more likely the kind of person who would go, no, freaking black people ruin everything, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, do they ruin everything? And I would try to engage him. But there would be a point, if he just doubled down, that I'd be like, you know what, fuck you. You're a piece of shit racist. I would know that I've just now made him a little more racist. But I'm okay with that. But It's an educated decision I make. The only issue I have is when people argue with me that, no, it's effective. You can't tell me it's not. And righteous anger is perfectly fine. I'm like, it's not when you just stop. You have a PR problem for a reason. It's because you do this. You can't do this and then just say it feels good. It's emotional reasoning to say, well, it feels good, therefore it is good. It's like, no, that's not. I mean, premarital sex feels good and is good. When it doesn't, well, I won't even make jokes like this, but pedophilia or something, like for pedophiles, it doesn't mean it's good just because of that. Also, if you feel bad about a situation, it doesn't always mean it's bad. Like we can't make decisions based purely on our emotions. Our emotions are good indicators, but I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
We're just products of culture, so we can't completely trust our emotional reactions to things.
Right. So Anyway, Kafka trapping is harmful, and I hope this gives you the tool to call it out, or at least understand when you're doing it. There's a reason why it's unwell with people, and it's a silencing tactic, but you can't. If you've ever seen any oppressed, majority or minority or oppressed people, you'll know what being silenced to them feels like. Like, it's not gonna work well. And this is reverse oppression. It's repression, not systemic, but you're trying to oppress their idea. If somebody's like, I don't know, man, I kind of feel like video games don't cause violence. And when I say feel like, I mean I have demonstrated through science, and I have convinced people through lit review and through the scientific peer review process. But I'm going to say feel to make you feel like we're equals, because I don't want to sound like a dick. And then they're like, oh, yeah, well, you're bashing neo-sarcasm because you're sexist. And then I'm like, just know that there's a word for this. It's called Kafkatrapping. I'm like, that's Kafkatrapping, and that's kind of unacceptable.
Right. I just want everyone to have the same standard of skepticism, and that same sort of, we all kind of pat ourselves on the back here in the atheist movement that we're all very skeptical and we avoid fallacies, and we can rattle off like the difference between a straw man fallacy, or we can tell a story of a no true Scotsman fallacy that goes on for like 30 minutes because we love fallacies so much, right? Like that's one of the ways we self-identify in the movement, right? We call ourselves free thinkers or skeptics, or remember the Brights that they try to make that catch on. Like, if that's something that you say you value, you have to apply it to everything, even the things that are uncomfortable. And especially the things that are uncomfortable, right? The things that you want to. Diderot, who wrote the Encyclopedia, he's one of the first Wikipedia forerunners, right, back in the French Revolution times. He said that we swallow greedily any lie that flatters us, but we sip drop by drop the truth that we find bitter. And that's what we do here. Like, we claim to be skeptics, we claim to be analytical thinkers, but we all have blind spots, every one of us. And this, for a lot of people, is a very big blind spot, where we will refuse to look at what the science says or what the psychology says, because we're so emotionally invested in this idea of tone policing or racism or whatever it is. Like, we don't want to be that Ben Affleck in the debate who's just, that's gross, that's racist, without even knowing what the hell we're talking about, because we're so emotionally invested in something.
Yeah. And I want to point out that I brought up the example in the very beginning that JT, will say the thing like, listen, I like Bernie Sanders. And he also does this with ideas of, anytime he criticizes any of these hot button issues, and he's like, I like it. I'm with it. I'm blah, 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 blah. And then he'll close the same thing. And I feel myself doing the same thing. I'm like, I'm like it. I'm with it. But this. I do that here. And this is what this author did too. They're like, listen, this sucks. The way he introduced it, I thought was interesting. I think I closed the window, but so I can't quote it. But he said, everybody uses tactics to silence other people, and everybody, and this can even happen in great social movements that need to happen. Like, sexism is a thing, needs to be confronted. Racism is a thing, it needs to be confronted. Homophobia is a thing, it needs to be confronted. The idea of sin is dumb, that needs to be confronted. But be careful, because even the best meaning people are going to have problems. They're going to do things on accident that are actually not right, that are not true and not helpful. And so we have to be open to looking at those. So,
and can we just have a little grace for? I know grace is a Christian word, but can we just have a little bit of, thinking the best of each other? Like, can we just assume that we're all kind of allies in this idea of making the world a better place, and not just immediately paint somebody as a racist or a sexist even if they say something terrible, right? Like, let's say I misspeak, right, and I just say. And I probably do all the time. Let's say I say something very sexist without meaning to, like, or even just like, hey, women's weight's over here, men's weight's over here, right? Like, it doesn't mean I'm a sexist. It means I misspoke, or I didn't self-examine. So can we find a way to correct each other without immediately assuming the worst about each other?
Exactly. Yeah. It's called mind reading, and in any conflict, it's the absolute worst, one of the absolute worst things you can do, and it causes so many downward spirals. I'm like, don't do that. Stop. Ask them, even if you have a good suspicion that and even if what they say in the answer is that you're pretty sure they're lying to make themselves feel better. How's it going to feel if you call them on that, whether you're right or wrong? If you're wrong, then you've just shit the bed. You're the evil person in here. You've just caused a moral atrocity by calling someone a liar who was just trying to be a nice person, and they were like, oh, my bad. But if you're right, then they're going to double down. They can't possibly be called out for being racist if they were being racist or whatever. Just
Right.
Racism is a bad one because I feel that there's less tolerance for that because there's more understanding. We've raised more awareness, but I don't know. They're all bad. Fuck it. I know. I'll just go all in. Fuck it. They're all bad. But either way, you need to just go, hey, this is what's happening. I'm sure, and I always do this. I'm sure you didn't mean to. You're a good person. I like you.
Right.
If it's a stranger, then I just say you're good. I'm sure you're a good person. I don't know you, but you probably got friends and family that love you. But I'm just letting you know that that's shitty. And if they're like, well, I don't know.
It's just a more effective, like, even if you don't give a shit about what the right thing to do is, which I think the right thing to do is assume that we're all good people, and that, I think that's the moral way of approaching life. But let's say you don't, like, let's just take the morals out of it. It's just a more helpful approach. It's just more useful not to be a dick about things if people misspeak, or if people say the wrong thing, or if Richard Dawkins gets on Twitter and says something stupid, which, he does that sometimes. That's like his thing now. But can we just can we just also realize that he means well, and even if we disagree on some issue of feminism or abortion or whatever it is that he shit the bed on, can we just at least acknowledge that, hey, you know what, we're all fighting for the same thing here, and he might need some education, or he might need to rethink his words, or he might just need to stay off Twitter. Maybe that's what he needs to do. But just turning against him and like trying to rip his throat out is not going to make him change the way he thinks. It's going to make him more likely to double down. That's how psychology works.
Yeah, it's absurd. So, yeah, and not to say that it doesn't happen. People sometimes do change their mind after being torn on, but typically what they do is they acquiesce publicly, and then they double down mentally. Like
Right.
That's the findings that we have as far as that goes. And even that's not normal. Normally they double down because they don't want to look like they were wrong.
Right.
So no matter what, just there's two different things. One that feels right. The second one, is it useful? And the answer is almost always no. And sometimes it's yes, but it's almost always no. And be at least willing to ask yourself that question.
Right.
So, yeah, cool. Kafkatrapping, man. It's a thing. It's pretty shitty, and let's stop doing it. Everyone, like even even if a conservative asks you, like, is there really a need for welfare? Just that doesn't mean he's guilty of not liking welfare. He's just wondering if there's a need, right? Or he or she.
Right.
And then just say, that's a good question. What do you think? And then, oh, yeah, well, I think people with bootstraps. Okay, well, what do you think is the best predictor of people's future wealth? Hard work. Yeah, measure that.
Yeah, don't assume that they're just assholes. They might just have been raised to value something differently and have never examined it. So if you really want to change minds, you're going to approach it from that approach, even if they are assholes.
Yeah, everybody has a family member that they love, that they disagree with. Pretend it's that person. You're going to get far. I've changed a lot of minds in my life. It's literally my profession. And I'm telling you, not just empirically, anecdotally, if that somehow speaks to you more, just do this. It works. And you walk out with more respect.
Yeah. Science, it works, bitches.
Yeah. But anyway, so thanks for listening this week. We do have a little bit of feedback, don't we? We do. Yes, we do. Someone had mentioned No Religion Required, which is I believe, a podcast. Let me just open it up. I already looked at this, but it was a while back. Yep. It's called No Religion Required. Hey, y'all. It's a podcast that is on iTunes and Spreaker, and it is they broadcast at I think 7 p.m. On Sundays, so a little later on the same day. And they tweeted us and said, our co-host Mo String is also a student at Ole Miss, found your show, great show. Ole Miss, baby. Yeah, there's good. Yeah. There's literally one more.
There's the two atheists now in Mississippi.
Yeah.
No, there's probably a lot more atheists in grad school than there are in the general Mississippi population.
Oh, it's now my assumption. Yeah, if you remember, it varies with education, as does voting for Bernie. So I just assume if you're higher educated, you're voting for Bernie, you're atheist, and you are Democratic. It's just a safe assumption.
Yeah, if you're just playing the numbers, it's pretty safe.
Yeah, but yeah.
Was that No Religion Required is the name of the show?
Yeah, No Religion Required. So, yeah, and thanks for all the follows we got on Twitter. I don't know how to do. I haven't posted in a while. I'm a bad social media person. If anybody wants to take that over, you're sure you can do it. But neither me or David have any propensity for that.
No, we're bad. We're bad millennials.
The worst millennials. Thanks for listening, everyone. Really appreciate it. We didn't get any new emails. We did get an activity on one of our podcasts called the God Theory Podcast 38, the last one, Respect the Troops, Unless You Shouldn't. And someone named Jerry Smith says, I support the veteran Tim, which I assume is Tim Eberhard.
Yeah, Tim. He's the guy who was on Facebook getting smeared for being a gay veteran. by the people who say support the troops as one of their party lines.
Yeah, it's so shitty. But anyway, pretty much it. Thanks for all the feedback. Also, the people have been posting on the God Theory Podcast Facebook page. Hey, you should join that. It's awesome. It's a closed group, so people can't see it.
How would you find it?
So you go to facebook.com/groups/God Theory Podcast, or you can just search the God Theory Podcast in Facebook. Can you find it that way? I think you can. It's a closed group, not secret.
Yeah, so join it up. Your parents won't disown you because they shouldn't be able to see that you joined. And we just put funny God stuff up there. Funny things about God that you see on the internet, they go up there.
It's fun.
I usually get a chuckle out of those.
It's like having
with the first lawyer that you put up with Adam trying to debate God.
Yeah.
Good point. Without having eaten the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we could not have known it was wrong to disobey you. That's always been a bit of a loophole in the foundation myth of Christianity.
Yeah, and if there was a lawyer back then, God would have been like, "Oh, I guess you're right," and then undid it, I guess. But hey, who are we to question mysterious ways? Hashtag.
Yeah,
but,
don't question. Stop tone policing God.
Yeah, don't tone police him. If he's angry, he's angry. Let him flood the whole world. Whatever, dude. Is it helpful? Fuck it. Doesn't matter. There's only one of him. He's the minority. I'm just kidding. We shouldn't joke about that. But yeah. So yeah, you can join the page. It's a lot of fun. It's like having that one. Have you ever been to church with an atheist?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you kind of look at each other and you're like.
Yeah,
it's like that.
Or when everyone's praying and you open your eyes to see who's not folding their arms and bowing their head, and you just kind of do that kind of nod, like yes, or and they nod back, and you just have that little moment of connection where there's one other person in the room who's not deluded.
Dude, that happened. I was just at a run. We a 5K, and I got third in my age group. Thank you very much, people.
Nice, the geriatric age group. Good work.
Yeah, it was super old. We all shared like a biscuit that we dipped in water. So old. Oh man, we all threw a couple hips out during the throw. We made it, and I got third.
Most of you were going downhill in wheelchairs, just picking up speed that way.
Yeah. I lost my teeth somewhere halfway through. I had to go back and get them. Still got third, so I feel good about that. But we call it geriatric park. No, okay, I'm done. So. There was a prayer beforehand, which I was like, oh, come on, man. So they're like, bow your head. And I came to the decision. I was like, this isn't the Christmas table. I'm just going to sit up and look. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to stand here. And so I did. I just kind of stood there. And whenever everybody, like all these heads, and but I looked around. I saw a couple people. I was like, oh, yeah. And there's someone really far away. I looked at him. We met eyes for a second. And I just kind of went like a little, yeah. Yeah. Hey, buddy.
Solidarity nod.
Yeah. And he just kind of like short nod back, a little smile. And then I was like, all right, there we go. Couple of us, a few of us out here who aren't going to acquiesce to this bullshit. But anyway, yeah, so it's like that. You should join the Facebook page, or you can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/God3Pod. Podcast doesn't fit, just go to pod, God3Pod. And hopefully I put up some funny things up there whenever I can.
Indeed. So hopefully we didn't offend too many people, but again, just challenge everything, be critical even of ourselves. We get corrected all the time on the show. It's fantastic. It's fun. Yeah,
I put something up with Bernie Sanders the other day, and I'm nuts about him. And I was just like, hey man, he finally just barely got ahead in the polls. And then two of my friends called me out in the comments and were like, he's not ahead, he's closed the distance. And I was like, fuck, yeah, you're right. God, that sucks because I said that publicly. And I was like, no, they're right. Yeah, thanks for calling me out. That's it sucks, but
you had to delete the post so no one could see that you were wrong.
No. Or like double down. Well, being ahead is kind of like
if you redefine being ahead as not being as far behind as you used to be, then yes, right.
Or just link polls where he's ahead and like just shit like that people do.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, do that. But until then, practice. That's your homework for the week. We're going to see you next week, and we should have a good topic. We've got a moral philosopher coming on in a month. We're going to talk about the psychology of violence and the necessity of it, if there is one, because I'm interested in this topic myself. So
yes, that came from me calling you out about something. So
yeah,
money where your mouth is.
That's where it is, man. I'm going to bring on someone that I hope is an authority on the figure and authority on the subject and prove me wrong or right or whatever.
Cool. So stay tuned and keep thinking critically.
Yeah, that's our closing statement. Peace.